How's everybody? We're a little late. You know this guy, don't you? We've had a busy morning with attacks from some of our so-called friends that we've had to deal with. I was telling Reverend Sharpton that we're going to have to turn the heat up not only on these Republicans, and a lot of you have heard me say this, but sometimes we've got to go straight at our Democratic so-called friends who are trying to take us out too. So we've been having a little bit of fun this morning as far as identifying folks and going after them. But let me just open it up with a few remarks. Now there's a committee that's been planning all of this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is the committee in the room?
Yes.
Why doesn't the committee stand up so we can give you a round of applause for the work? I want to thank all of you in advance for taking part in the activities. We do this every year. As a matter of fact, I think Al was here a couple of years ago when I was Secretary Treasurer. And now guess what, Al? I'm the president. Then we come together to celebrate and remember, and we come together to learn. Black History Month got its start, as all of you may know, in the 1920s when historian and educator Carter G. Woodson announced that the second week of February would be Negro History Week. Now you know why that was chosen? The second week was chosen because both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass were born on that week. Woodson had hoped that one day the need for this special remembrance would actually end. He didn't want it to continue because our history will be part of every aspect of the American culture. In fact, all of you know Morgan Freeman. He once remarked, and I quote, "I don't want a Black History Month because Black history is American history." His comments are on target. Black history is American history. Yet too many of us, of all races and nationalities, don't really know enough about our heritage, about what our ancestors and mothers and fathers and grandparents and great-grandparents were able to do in the fights that they were faced with. You know, we don't appreciate the extent to which the challenges and achievements and battles of African Americans are at the very core of who we are as a nation, who we are as a people. On the wall outside, I think all of you have seen it, there's some fascinating facts about Black history through the centuries. Some are well known. Some of those facts may be new to all of us. So I hope you'll take the time at some point this month to take a look at the display and pay particular attention to the far right of that display where there's a real handsome gentleman with this picture. Okay, that's me. I'm kidding. Okay, laugh a little bit. I mean, listen out. Please. You know, for AFSCME, our contributions include confronting the politicians, and we continue to do so, who want to silence the voices of workers, fighting the right to work for less laws that are intended to diminish our power, diminish the power of working families all over this country, protecting voters' rights and protecting the vital programs that so many people rely on. Not for a handout, but for a handout. We have to keep fighting. We've got to keep marching. We've got to keep agitating. We've got to continue to be troublemakers. Sometimes it may feel like we're coming up on the rough side of the mountain. But as the song says, and I quote, "Although my burdens sometimes press me down, if I could only keep the faith, I would have strength just to run this race." This afternoon, I'm honored and privileged to present to you and introduce to you a great friend who's always been with us, who stood shoulder to shoulder with us in every fight that AFSCME has had. We're honored to have him here to launch Black History Month. Now, as you know, one of AFSCME's priorities for 2013 is to build and rebuild our relationships with our allies and with our coalition partners, to work with them so they can work with us, to support their fights as they support our fights. That's the only way we can fight more effectively for our members and for working families across the country. And I got to tell you, our strongest partner, make no mistake about it, our strongest partner is this guy sitting right next to me, the Reverend Al Sharpton. He is our strongest partner. Whenever I make a phone call, whenever I ask him to do something, whenever I ask him to stand shoulder to shoulder with us, he's there. He is there. Give him a round of applause for Everybody knows that he's the founder of the National Action Network, and I'm proud to be a board member of that organization. He's been a community activist, a minister, and advocate for more than 40 years, and is one of America's most well-known civil rights leaders. He's one of America's most well-known leaders, period. He ran for president in 2004. I remember him coming late to a debate one time, but I won't go into that story. He blamed it on the non-union cab driver. Remember that? He ran on a platform that focused on social justice and fairness. He's host of MSNBC's Politics Nation. Who's seen that show? Everybody seen that show? All right. He always finds a way to enlighten us with his interviews and commentaries. On last Monday's show, he noted that the 4th would have been the 100th birthday. The 100th birthday of Rosa Parks. And he said, on our 100th birthday, we all should make a Rosa resolution. Resolve to do something. If you can't speak up, write out. If you can't write out, participate. Or do like Rosa. Find a way to sit and get in the way. All of us have got to make a difference. Those words remind us that one way or another, we have a responsibility to move the train of progress forward. And with partners and allies and friends like Al Sharpton, let me tell you something, sisters and brothers, the challenges may be many, the issues may be great, but we will win. We will win because we are right and they are wrong. And we just got to continue to fight and battle every single day. So, with that, let me introduce to you my partner, Al Sharpton.
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored and happy to be back at AFSCME, especially during Black History Month, and now with Lee in his new position. I don't know the last guy that told me he's president now. Got on Air Force One. I keep running into my friends that remind me that they're president and I'm not. I ran for president. But I think that it goes without saying that there's not one to me that is more important in this country and in the labor movement and has shown that down through the years than our president, Lee Saunders, the president of AFSCME. We're talking about Black History Month. He is walking Black history because he's the first black president, first African-American president of a major union like this. And there was a time that we had to fight for blacks to be admitted into unions. And now to see the president of the American Federation of Municipal State Employees, an African-American from Ohio, from Cleveland. I remember last year when we were touring the country against voter suppression and these new voter laws, and we got into the Ohio part of the tour, and we were in one of the rough sections of Cleveland. I said, man, this is bad. And Lee said, this is where I'm from, be careful. So I said, nice neighborhood. This year is a year of some very interesting and serious anniversaries. On January 1st, it was the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. August 28th will be the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King made the famous speech, I Have a Dream. On April 4th is the 45th anniversary of his assassination. This is also the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Medgar Evers, the 50th anniversary of the killing of the 4 girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. But I want to concentrate for a few minutes on the 3 anniversaries that I mentioned. The Emancipation Proclamation, March on Washington, and the anniversary of the 45th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. 150 years ago, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. Now, the reason that becomes obviously is important because it was the day that African Americans went from being property to being recognized as at least free people. People do not realize when you say that in American history, blacks were enslaved for 262 years and have only been free 150 years. Meaning when you hear a lot of people, right-wingers, say, well, get over it, they don't look at American history. We've been enslaved longer than we've been free. In fact, in the South, we've only been legally guaranteed the right to vote 48 years. My mother, who was born and raised in Dothan, Alabama, died last year. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. She had born and raised in Dothan. She could not vote in her hometown till she was 39. So a lot of times we live so quickly in the span of history, we don't realize that a lot of situations have been longer in the negative than in the positive. So if I'm one generation away from not being able to vote in my family, then voter suppression, voter ID, voter disenfranchisement means a lot more to me than it does other people because they didn't grow up in a home where parents had to talk about they couldn't vote. Yeah. So it's easy for others to dismiss it because they didn't have that experience. Lee talks about, I host a show at MSNBC. Well, when I'm sitting with other hosts, I'm the only one in the room because I'm the only black with a primetime show that says, well, it is not an academic issue to me. You talk about my mother and my father couldn't vote. So if I appear sensitive about changing voter laws, it's because I grew up hearing stories about they were asked how many bubbles was on a bar of soap, or they couldn't vote. That's right. Or they were asked questions like, what's on page 149 of the dictionary, or they couldn't vote. So I approach this personally, not only academically. When Lincoln freed the slaves, it was an abolitionist movement that put pressure on him to do so, by blacks and whites. The one thing, I went to see the Lincoln movie, good movie, but they left out the fact slaves were not free because Lincoln and a couple of senators got up one morning and felt it was the right thing to do. There was tremendous pressure. They didn't have William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass in the movie. You would think watching the movie that Abe woke up one morning and talked to Mary Lincoln and said, you know, this is terrible, let's free the slaves. That's not what happened. It has always been the pressure of progressive people, black and white and Latino and Asian, that caused change in America. Now, reason I wanted to start at the Emancipation Proclamation is once the slaves became free and went through Reconstruction and began electing people, given the right to vote, again, not because anyone really was on their side, but given the right to vote because they didn't want the Southern Confederates to outvote them. They were able to elect 2 in the U.S. Senate, elect almost 30 in the U.S. Congress. Then, because the Supreme Court began giving regressive decisions, by the beginning of the 20th century, they had lost the right to vote, and there were no blacks in Congress, 22 black congressmen gone, no blacks in the Senate. We never began mobilizing again toward our rights until the 1920s. and that was led by a labor leader named A. Philip Randolph. The parallel between labor and civil rights has happened since there was a labor and a civil rights movement. A. Philip Randolph, who formed a union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and fought some biased elements in the labor movement, and organized. He was the one that first threatened a march on Washington in '41. He was able to convince Roosevelt to do some things that stopped the march. Finally, the march happened in '63. The march in '63 that Dr. King made the famous I Have a Dream speech was called by A. Philip Randolph. In this side of history, people think it was the I Have a Dream march. It was not the I Have a Dream march. It was a speech at Randolph's march. Randolph and Labor, Walter Reuther, UAW at that time, called the march. It was organized by a labor leader named Bayard Rustin. Because Bayard Rustin was gay, and it was a time of homophobia, they didn't want Bayard out front. And he was robbed of the credit he earned because of they were homophobic at the time. They were misogynists at the time. Women were not allowed to speak at the March on Washington. Dorothy Height, who was one of the so-called Big Six civil rights leaders, couldn't make a speech that day. The only women on the program was Lena Horne because she was a movie star and she could wave at the crowd, and Mahalia Jackson was allowed to sing. So when we have the 50th anniversary march and rally this year, women and gays and others will be on the program that couldn't have been on 50 years ago. When you look at Randolph, who had to fight for the right for unions to, in many ways, open up the doors for black membership, and 50 years later you have a black from Cleveland as the president of AFSCME, it shows you a lot of progress made in a short period of time. Problem that many of us have today is that we don't realize change is a process, not an event. A lot of people think you do one event and everything's supposed to be cool overnight. Change is a process. I remember in 1994, I was part of the election observers in South Africa for the first election. And they don't put individuals on the ballot in South Africa. They put parties. So the ANC won the election, which meant they, of course, elected in the ANC Nelson Mandela, be president. Well, the day after the election, lady got up in Soweto and went out to the suburbs, saw a beautiful mansion with a pool in the back, lovely pillars in the front, rung the bell. The Afrikaner came to the door and said, "May I help you?" She said, "Yes, I'll have this one." He said, "You'll have what one?" She said, "I'll take this house. We won the election. It's my house. Move out." Because in her mind, everything changed. They were in charge now. Well, that's how some of us acted when Obama won. Rather than understanding winning an election is part of a process, a lot of us thought that the struggle was over and the move was over because of one election. Some folk, I traveled, I had to go around the country tell people, a lot of y'all never voted before and haven't voted since. And want to know why your income didn't double the night Obama won. And what happened? We were so celebratory. Some folks didn't take their gowns off from the inaugural ball for 2 years. And when they did, the Tea Party had won the midterm election. That's why history is important. What Randolph did, all the way to King, King was in Memphis at the end of his life. This is after the Civil Rights Act passed in '64, after the Voting Rights Act of '65. '68, he goes to Memphis at the request of a union, an AFSCME local, that represented sanitation workers, where he made the great speech, "I've been to the mountaintop." I looked over and seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. That was at an AFSCME rally for sanitation workers. The next day, he was killed as they spent all day long in federal court fighting an injunction against the AFSCME local strike. Here we are 50 years later, and Martin Luther King III and I are going to be joining Lee and the AFSCME chapter in dealing with the 50th anniversary of that fight and the assassination of Dr. King 45 years later. But the sad part is that as we head to Memphis April 3rd, 45 years after that rally, we have a black man in Philly that's doing the same thing to an AFSCME chapter. So to go from King fighting in Memphis to our having to fight in Philly, somebody that looks like us, shows that it is not about black and white, it's about right and wrong. Mayor Nutt Turner is just as wrong in trying to break a union as they were 45 years ago. And we can't memorialize Dr. King and then not do King-like things. You can't have King Day and Union Bus. You can't cry for him and then try to undo what he tried to stop. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been in Memphis in the first place. So to draw from the Emancipation Proclamation to April 4th, to the anniversary of Dr. King, to the March on Washington, which was the last of the three. March on Washington, as I said, organized by Randolph and Rustin. Read Dr. King's speech, since that's the most famous part of it. The first part of the speech was that America had given the Negro a bad check. It had bounced in the Bank of Justice, return marked insufficient funds. That was the text of the speech. The I Have a Dream part was just the climax of the speech. I argue that America has still given blacks and whites and Latinos and Asians a check, and it's still bouncing. But it's not bouncing because of insufficient funds. If you look at the bounce check, this is marked stop payment. They have the money. They just stopped the payment. They're trying to stop Medicaid, stop Medicare, stop Social Security, stop wages for workers, make laws calling right to work, which means the exact opposite. So if there is a lesson for all Americans in black history, it's a history of a struggle of people to continue to fight no matter what for what is right. That is what makes America great. The legacy of black history is that people would not be denied their rightful place in the human family. And it parallels labor history. And the question is whether we sit on our laurels and talk about how great our forefathers were, or whether we internalize that spirit and continue to fight that they fought for us to be able to have. Think of the progress made. It all came from struggle. Think if we don't continue to struggle, we will lose all that progress. Yes, we don't have the turmoil of the 60s, but we still have the need to struggle. I was in Los Angeles yesterday. We opened up National Action Network's West Coast office, and we took the red eye back to get back today, because when Lee say you got to be here, you got to be here. I said, Lee, I don't know if I can be there on Wednesday. I'm in LA Tuesday. He's emailed me all the red eyes that were available. Anybody that works around Lee knows that Lee will not hear excuses. I'm here. I'm sleepy, but I'm here. And one of the things that happened when I was coming back, Attorney Lamont Bland was traveling with me, was our national field director. Halfway from LA back east, we ran into turbulence. And for about a half hour, the plane rocking up and down. You that have gone through turbulent flights know how that is. But then after a while, it smoothed out. Just because we got through the turbulence and got into smooth air, we didn't get off the plane because we had not arrived where we were going. You wait till you land at your destination before you get off. So don't confuse the lack of turbulence with an arrival. Because if you get off too quick, you are going to destruct. We are not there yet. We still have some miles to travel. Thank God for those that came through the turbulent times that brought us this far. But don't make mockery of the trip by getting off before we have arrived.
Thank you.
My last point is, I and Lee and others were guests of President Obama at his inauguration a couple of weeks ago. And we were all brought to the church with him that morning and sat on the platform. And as I sat there, I watched as they brought out the traveling Bible of Martin Luther King. The day before, in the private ceremony, President Obama had been sworn in on President Lincoln's Bible. And the day of the public ceremony, as we sat there, he was sworn in on the traveling Bible of Martin Luther King. Man that was sitting near me said, "Isn't this amazing? Lincoln's Bible and King's Bible." I said, "Yeah, but you need to know the history." The fact is that Lincoln's Bible was on the mantelpiece in the White House. Heads of states saw that Bible. But Dr. King's Bible traveled a different route. Dr. King's Bible had traveled with him through the poor rural areas of Mississippi and the backwoods of Georgia. If you look closely, his Bible had been checked by the correction officers in Birmingham, Alabama, when he went to jail and wrote that letter from a Birmingham jail, cell number in that Bible. But the bailiff that checked his Bible out, that checked it as property in a Birmingham city jail, would have never dreamed that that Bible would be at the Capitol, being used at the centerpiece of the inauguration of a president of the United States. That proves to me, if we fight for what's right, even if you can't see the victory, you can achieve beyond your own expectations. And when I watched this black hand of Barack Obama go on Dr. King's Bible, it told me that if we keep fighting, even though it may seem dark, that right will overpower wrong, and that we can win in the end. So let us recommit during Black History Month to keep making history and not disappoint those that brought us this far. And because they put themselves on the line, we produced the Barack Obama. We produced the Elise Saunders. And we've got more than we can produce if those in labor, those in the trenches, just find the same spirit and determination of those that were ahead of us. Thank you, God.
Some of you may want to get your pictures taken, so, right? Which is more important, the questions or the pictures?
Let's do the picture.
Do the pictures. Come on up. How you guys want to do it? Let's get some water here. Where's the committee?
Oh, you want to do the committee first? Wait on the committee? Now, Logan, not here. Hey. Okay, Logan.
Come on up, everybody.
Come on, man. Good. All right, thank you.
Should I take my hat off? Excuse me.
No pictures with him.
You looking at her? You looking at her? I got you.
Did you get me, Kevin?
Let's get out.
Kevin, did you take a picture of Deborah and him? Did you take a picture of Deborah and him? Deborah Dawson?
I don't know, I can't tell you.
No.
I got your back. I got your back.
You didn't get me?
I got your back.
You got my back.
Go ahead.
Kevin. Kevin, you got me?
I didn't. I didn't.